What is your assessment of Donald Trump in these final days?
I think that you've said it exactly right, Lawrence. He hasn't changed. And that really was one of our main messages to begin with, that it's not about politics. It was never about politics. It's that this is a deeply disturbed man, a delusional psychopath who has been the same his whole adult life, and who we knew would get worse the more stress he was under, because that's what happens with people with this kind of severe disorder. So when Nancy Pelosi said that she was making sure that the nuclear button couldn't be pushed, that was very wise and made a lot of sense. It was not an overreaction in the slightest. And when she said he's unstable, absolutely, that is exactly the situation we're in and why he needs to be removed immediately, yesterday, really, because he is going to continue to get worse. And after he leaves office, he will continue to get worse. We will not see the end of him unless he's locked up.
The with the kind of addictive quality of Twitter, what does it mean to someone like Donald Trump to be banned from Twitter?
You know, it's interesting. The 88 million people, I think, was the number that he has as followers. They're not just supporters and they're not just fans. From his standpoint, they're worshipers. He sees himself in his delusional belief as a god. And the people who support him worship him. He doesn't care at all about them, mind you, as we know. It's an entirely one-way street. But that number is meaningful to him. I think, as somebody said, it's more important to him that he keeps those 88 million than being impeached, because he doesn't really tolerate, he doesn't hear or know losses. If he's impeached, he will pass it off as yet another attack on him. And he would do that if he lost all the 88 million too. But he holds on to the things that he needs to believe, and the rest goes by him because he is unable to tolerate that reality.
Why will his condition worsen after he leaves the presidency and is living a life on a golf course waiting for his next appearance in court as a defendant?
Well, I think that's why. I think that to the extent that the reality sinks in to any degree, he's becoming more and more pressured. After all, you know, he is supposed to be the king of the universe from his standpoint. And the more he is not, the more it's evident that he's not, the more that he has to appear in court, or under the worst case for him, in prison, the harder it's going to be for him. And then it's not that he tolerates the loss. He never becomes depressed about it. He becomes more delusional. So the risk of his having any power at all, or having access to firearms, for example, is increasing. The more desperate he becomes, the more delusional he is, the more he needs to prove to himself, ultimately, that he is still a god. So the less power he has, the more stress he's under, the more dangerous he is. And again, why he needs to be removed immediately.